Morning, all. All right, I wanted to talk about something a little different today. This is something that I got the idea to do the last time I did a goalie playoff video, and now while I was doing this one, I got an idea for another. I thought about trying to combine it with this one, and I thought that's just not going to work. So the next in this series will be me taking a look at times that Hall of Fame goaltenders have met each other in the Stanley Cup Final. Because I not that long ago talked about how Stanley Cup goaltenders aren't necessarily Vezina winners, and how odd that is that there's a bit of diversion there. So that may very well be a discussion point as well. Looking at Vezina winning goaltenders, where did they finish in the playoffs? But for today, I'm taking a look at teams that have needed more than one goaltender to reach the Stanley Cup Final. Now, it had to be a minimum of 3 wins for both goaltenders. I thought, there are times where a goalie comes in, maybe gets a win, maybe might get two during a run, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a big turning point or anything like that. So I thought minimum has to be 3, and it has to be a Stanley Cup finalist because, again, I had to kind of narrow things down. Otherwise, it would just be complete and total madness, and I might not be able to fit it all onto one board. So it starts with 1981 because, again, that's when I started watching hockey. But I will say, for the Hall of Fame goalie matchups in the finals, I want to go all the way back to 68. I want to go all the way back to 1968, and there are some fascinating ones. Right once you get to 1969, it's fascinating how many Hall of Fame goaltenders were involved in that playoffs. But anyways, Joe Meloche and Don Beaupre. Meloche wins 8 games for that run for the Minnesota North Stars. Beaupre wins 4. And it's, quite the Cinderella run that the North Stars had before the Islanders said no. And again, that was the year that I really got into hockey. 1984, it is Grant Fuhr and Andy Moog. Now, what's interesting is that the Oilers win the Stanley Cup. Grant Fuhr wins 11 games, Moog wins 4. The previous year, 1983, it was Moog who played a lion's share of the games, and Fuhr just eclipsed him. They had more faith in Fuhr in the playoffs, starting with 84 and then just rolling on from there, right up until 1990 when Ranford ended up replacing Fuhr. But Moog was a really solid goaltender in his own right, and he did win 4 games in that Stanley Cup run. There were times, too, back then where you might have a 3-0 series lead and you put in the backup. You're like, yeah, no, we're fine, and we can put in the backup. So that's kind of a role that Moog had then as well. It doesn't happen again until 1991, and it's a Stanley Cup run for the Pittsburgh Penguins, thus the Pittsburgh Garb. Tom Barrasso with 12 wins that year. I talked about him in the last video I did on runs that kind of come out of nowhere. But it's easy to forget, without Frank Pietrangelo coming in and playing well, before anybody says anything, I know Pietrangelo is currently a player for the Vegas Golden Knights, but his uncle Frank pronounced it Pietrangelo when he played for the Penguins and then the Whalers. So it's one of those things, right? But yeah, Pietrangelo, 4 wins that year, really, really key. Without his really solid goaltending early on, we don't have a Stanley Cup win for Pittsburgh that year. 1993, Rob Stauber gave the LA Kings 3 wins in that run to the finals. So Kelly Hrudey, rightfully what is remembered from that run to the finals, and he had 10 wins, but Rob Stauber, 3 wins for him. And that was at a time where Stauber was still seen as, potentially a future starting goaltender in the NHL. Of course, it didn't necessarily work out that way, but a run to the Stanley Cup final, still a fun situation to be put in as a young goaltender. 1997, Philadelphia, their first of 2 times on the board. Garth Snow had 8 wins for that run to the Stanley Cup final, and Ron Hextall had 4. So Garth Snow, not likely to be remembered as like a big clutch playoff performer, but he had a pretty good run in 97. And again, Hextall, 4 wins for him. And the Philadelphia Flyers just getting warmed up when it came to using 2 different goaltenders. But in 2002, it happens again, and it's the Carolina Hurricanes. So this is the 3rd time in a row, 4th time out of 6, that the team that's had to use 2 goaltenders has not won the Stanley Cup. So Artur Serbe had 10 wins. Absolutely ridiculous run, but Kevin Weeks had 3. And Weeks' numbers were actually pretty good during that run as well. So he didn't play a ton, but Weeks, without those 3 wins, Carolina probably not in the Stanley Cup final. And yeah, they did get there. Irbe, a lot of credit, but Weeks deserves some as well. Now, infamously, if you're an Oilers fan, you get to 2006, right? Rolison had 12 wins, and then Markkanen had 3. Now, I was a UC Markkanen fan, gonna be honest. I was really hoping that if the Oilers pulled that off, that it would lead to more recognition for Markkanen. Of course, the Oilers didn't pull it off, and in part, that's due to Rolison getting hurt in Game 1 of that Stanley Cup final. But I still thought Markkanen did a pretty good job of proving that he could play, and in the end, it's not a Stanley Cup ring for him, but I thought he played well. And then the following season, Anaheim used 2 goaltenders, but breaking a streak of 4 in a row that didn't win the Cup, Anaheim does. And it's interesting because Brizgalov was used by Anaheim to start the playoffs and played well. And then in Game 4, he gets pulled. Giguère goes in, and Giguère says, yeah, I'm not giving it back. Giguère wins 13 games in that run. Brizgalov had the 3 wins. And yeah, it was I think part of the reason why you end up seeing Brizgalov end up elsewhere, because yeah, he was a good goaltender. He was stuck behind Giguère. No embarrassment there. There are plenty of instances throughout hockey history, right up until now, where we've seen backup goaltenders that could be a good starter elsewhere, but they're buried behind a really, really good goaltender, and that was the case with Giguère, who in 2007 finished what he started in 2003 when he led Anaheim all the way to the Stanley Cup final. And then infamously or famously, depending on how you look at it, you have the Philadelphia Flyers in 2010. Michael Leighton had 8 wins. Boucher had 6. And Johan Backlund got into a game there as well. It was an interesting setup with the Philadelphia Flyers going into those playoffs. They were really at the bottom end. They were 18th overall in the standings. Their goaltending was seen as just not being good enough going into those playoffs. And then they went all the way to the final, which led to the discussion of, so do you need a top tier 5 million plus goaltender in net? Or, yeah, can you just throw whoever in net, and if your team can score goals, it's fine. And Leighton and Boucher had some really good games along the way. They also had some rough games, but if Leighton had a bad game, they just went to Boucher. Boucher had a bad game, they went to Leighton. And generally it worked. It worked out pretty well. They just do not get over the hump in the 2010 final, where they lost to Chicago. Now, Chicago's the next team on the board, so that's a Cup winner, and it starts a run of what could be 4 in a row. Could be, because we don't know yet for sure it'll be 4 in a row. So Corey Crawford with 13 wins in 2015 for Chicago, but Scott Darling ends up with 3. And Darling, pretty solid overall backup. Eventually it won him a contract he wasn't able to live up to. But yeah, Crawford, excellent run for him in 2015. But again, it's that without the backup goaltender getting those wins, who knows what might have happened if they'd lost those games instead. And then 2 years later, Pittsburgh. And this is really quite the run. You had Fleury and Murray, which rhymes nicely, of course, and Matt Murray, his second year as a rookie, and his second Stanley Cup as a rookie, probably gave him this idea that he just win cups every year and all that. He hasn't won a cup since then, but I think those 2 cup rings are pretty nice. But Fleury was needed for 9 wins, and Murray was needed for 7. Now, Marc-Andre Fleury, 2016, A, he was hurt, and B, when he came in, he wasn't very good. But 2017, he made up for it. And of course, we found out after that cup win, well, really we knew before that cup win, but that Fleury was headed to the Vegas Golden Knights. And so this was kind of seen as probably being his last hurrah. He's going to an expansion team. They're not going to do anything. But yeah, Murray and Fleury. And I honestly thought in 2017, you could have made an argument for splitting the Conn Smythe between the 2 of them, because they gave really good goaltending to Pittsburgh that year. So 2022, last year, we saw a team win the Stanley Cup who required 2 goaltenders. Kemper had 10 wins. Francouz had 6. So when Kemper got hurt, Francouz went in and played well. And that's key. That's really the big thing about, having 2 really good goaltenders. And it's the reason why I don't really like to, go with that side that says, well, you can have whoever's the backup. It really doesn't. As long as you got him as the starter, the backup's not really a big deal. It absolutely can be a big deal, because that starter can get hurt, as was the case last year with Colorado, and they didn't miss a beat. Francouz was really good. And then the reason for this video is because this year it's happening again. This is the 13th time on this board. Adin Hill, 9 wins so far. Brossoit had 5 before he got hurt, and Adin Hill got thrown in there instead. Yeah, they're up 2-0 in the Stanley Cup final. Odds are Hill ends up with 11 wins. Brossoit ends up with 5, but we shall see until they get those last 2 wins. Maybe Florida has that comeback in them. But yeah, it's a run to the final, so it qualifies for the board anyways. So even if Vegas wasn't able to close this out, which again seems crazy to me, but yeah, 14 wins so far between Hill and Brossoit, who were not expected to be the starters. We haven't seen Jonathan Quick for a minute in this playoffs. I didn't mention him in the video I did yesterday because I feel like at age 37, with his stats trending downward, and the fact that Vegas will not put him in the net, they went through Brossoit, they went through Hill. I don't see any situation where Quick ends up in the net. But yeah, these guys are the real deal. And I do think Jonathan Quick probably ends up retiring after this season's done. And hey, if he gets a cup ring to go with that retirement, it's his third Stanley Cup ring. And while he's already a surefire Hall of Famer, that would really help to cinch that as well. So yeah, and I know people are gonna say, well, he didn't play anything in it. It's 3 Stanley Cup rings. It's something that the Hall of Fame committee would definitely mention big time. 3 Stanley Cup championships, most recently with Vegas. But Quick played a role during the regular season, and now during the playoffs, it's Hill and Brossoit, a team that was expected to have Leonard as the starter, and then Leonard couldn't play, and then Thompson was the starter. Now Thompson's been hurt. Brossoit was going to be the starter. He got hurt. And so you got Adin Hill, number 4. But he's played well for number 4 and probably gets re-signed to come back next year by the Vegas Golden Knights. But again, keep in mind that next up will be the Hall of Fame goalie matchups in the finals. And also, I'm thinking of doing a list of what I think are the best tandems. Again, in my time watching hockey when it comes to Stanley Cup goaltending, which would include like Smith and Melanson, that kind of thing, or Fir and Moog. That would definitely be up near the top. But yeah, so look forward to that and arguing with me on that one. I'm sure the arguments will be pretty brisk. I might restrict that just to Cup winners, but hey, we'll see. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.